That's how it goes sometimes.
That's how it goes. Good evening once again, primetime partiers. It's primetime party time. Welcome back to our 1 hour of all things media and entertainment live on the air at 9 p.m. at ptptshow.com and on your time, wherever you stream podcasts. Tonight, we are covering a buzzworthy and recently released show, WandaVision, in this week's segment of Primetime Today. Daniel and I will give our toast and roast of this past week before diving into our favorite and most memorable moments from WandaVision. Even though the final episode aired last week, this is your spoiler warning. Now we've said it. You have been warned, because we will talk about the entire series at length. Hey, Daniel, how was your week?
Hey, Tracy. Week's going well. That's funny that you say prime time today. You're right. Looks a little
Yes.
different than the prime time that we usually cover on this show. I believe that the prime time that we're discussing right now is like midnight Pacific time on a Friday, and or for myself, a lunch break on a Friday, which is a little different than the 8 to 11 hour that we're used to here.
Exactly.
But yeah, how are you doing, Tracy?
Good. So for my toast of this
Yes.
week, I have a few.
Oh.
Some literal, some very metaphorical. So toast number one is, as a person who works in the international higher education industry, I was able to secure my first dose of the COVID-19 vaccine.
Congratulations.
So we're happy to have it. And my literal toast is to Konbi. I ventured to LA this weekend to do a little hike and have a little picnic in the park with sandwiches from Konbi, short for konbini, which is convenience store in Japanese, where they have in Japan. The 7-Elevens are very fancy, and they're a lot of times 7-Eleven and holding. So it's not the rotating hot dog that you're used to seeing in the US that has aged probably more than you have in the sun. But the sandwiches that you get at these places are really good. Like, chefs from all over try to remake the egg salad sandwich that you get at a Japanese 7-Eleven, which normally, as an American, you're conditioned to be like, I would never eat a egg mayonnaise product from 7-Eleven because I have enough brain cells to say no. But they are quite good in Japan. And this place is like a kind of, I'd say, high level gourmet take on the convenience store sandwich. So I got one where it's like a omelet. So it's like tamago, which is like, it means egg in Japanese, but a lot of times there's tamagoyaki, which is like an omelet that's mixed with like dashi, which is fish broth, and some other stuff to sweeten it up. And so they made that, but then they layered in some nori, some seaweed, and some crab, and they put it on toasted milk bread.
Wow.
It was a delight.
It sounds like a delight.
And I had it
genuinely
with
sounds
some
like
very kind of I want to say maybe wasabi or horseradishy potato salad on the side, and a hojicha latte. And I was just feeling very I went to Elysian Park and I was like, this is nice. I miss this. Yeah, so that was really nice. I would say my roast of the week is the roast that we're having with our counterparts, the roots of which we came as Americans, is that there was a interview with the now previous royal family members, Meghan Markle and Prince Harry. And yeah, if you have not been up to date on that, I would encourage you to read up, mostly because it's just it's a lot. But it's basically talking about how they were treated in the royal family, and Meghan Markle specifically as a mixed race woman, how she was not treated very well, and both by the tabloids and kind of allegedly certain parts of the family making comments about her future children and stuff. So it's an Oprah interview. Oprah's almost like Barbara Waltering is that a verb? This interview, which makes you think like, is this the new pivot in your career, Oprah? Are you gonna
Oh.
like do this? Which I kind of hope she does. It'd be interesting to just see like the progression of Oprah into like, ooh, are we gonna do investigative journalism now? I'm intrigued. I'll watch.
Wow. I didn't
So
realize
yeah.
this was a thing. Okay, well, I'll put that as my roast then. I mean, I need to go. I need to go figure out what has happened. This is news to me, but I'll add on to that. As far as toasts go, vaccines for sure. It is really great seeing a lot of people around me getting vaccinated. And as well, another toast to keep mine original is the primetime community. We're still getting great feedback from our community, and it is really great to hear what it is you like about the show, what it is that you want to like more about the show. You can find us pretty much anywhere. We got a chat room right here on ptptshow.com. We got info at ptptshow.com. I'm sure half of our syndication platforms have comment sections. We'll go out and we'll check them all. You can hit us up on our RSS feed comment section, I think.
Yeah.
And especially tonight, I think our topic is something that a lot of the primetime community is well versed in, perhaps even more so than I know maybe me. So I'd be happy to really want to hear from the primetime community, and definitely for tonight's show. But I am toasting them, toasting you as a community member of primetime for all that you are and do for us, and that's pretty much it. What are we toasting with?
Toasting tonight, since WandaVision starts out with a ode to retro television, we are doing our take on floats. But we had to do with what we had in our cabinets and fridges and freezers in true chopped fashion. So mine is a Coke Zero float with French vanilla ice cream.
That sounds nice.
And it's quite lovely, but I know people get real rigid on the type of soda you use for floats. And also some people are very like, you're either on Team Diet Coke or Team Coke Zero. And I have to say, I've been more Coke Zeroing these days.
Really?
Yes. Diet soda is something that I enjoy. I know many people shamed me for it when I used to go into the office. And to that I say, I'll just drink it more. More for me.
More for Tracy. I like it. So a Coke Zero float is what you're doing.
Yes.
Then.
I am doing a Coke Zero float.
All right. So I didn't really have any beverages to make a float with this week that would be considered traditional. So I might be doing something a little controversial here. I did have a limoncello, LaCroix. It's the best bubbly beverage that I could put in here with vanilla ice cream. I'm gonna try it right now. I wonder.
That actually sounds pretty good because the limoncello is kind of like
low-key, that works.
Yeah,
it lets you know how much of the float is the vanilla ice cream. The limoncello is a lot of texture right here.
Yeah, it just needs to create the foam. And really, the limoncello liqueur, I've had this one. It's kind of lemon vanilla-y, so it actually does kind of work as a float.
Oh, it's not good to...
It's very much the float of millennials, La Croix float.
Yeah. Yeah, I was thinking I might have had to take a sip and ask why I did that, but we'll see. I'm still able to get lemon or not lemon, the vanilla. We'll see what happens when the ice cream is no more.
We're getting the right flavor notes in here. And also to plug where we'll be soon, we will be launching our Instagram so that you can follow us on social media, and we'll talk more about what shows are coming up next and give you some kind of insight into what we'll be toasting with so that you can truly join this as a collective audience experience.
Toast and roast with us.
Toast and roast with us. Now for the break before we get into WandaVision.
Instant note that the limoncello float sounds like a nasty concoction, but that's not what we're talking about anymore. We're talking about WandaVision.
WandaVision. So WandaVision is technically a drama, but a drama within the Marvel universe, which there's always some dramatic and fight scenes when we get to Marvel. So this series is created by Jack Schaffer, aired on January 15th, 2021, up into March 5th, 2021. And we are airing this on March 8th. So this is a timely released show.
Primetime
Pat on the
today.
backs for us. The cast is mainly Elizabeth Olsen, Paul Bettany, Catherine Hahn. You'll also see Kat Dennings and Randall Park. Yeah. So you'll see some other voices in there, but those are the top 3 for sure in all of the episodes. And the seasons, we have 1 season, 9 episodes, and as far as we know, this is a mini series. So we don't think, nor do we predict, that there will be a second season of this show based on the plot, but only time will tell, and Marvel money. So title sequence different each time, and that's a big part of this show. So we'll get into that as we start talking about it more. And a recap of what is WandaVision if you were going to recommend this to someone else. So it's a blend of classic television and the Marvel Cinematic Universe, in which Wanda Maximoff, Elizabeth Olsen's character, and Vision, Paul Bettany, 2 superpowered beings, live their idealized suburban lives, begin to suspect that everything is not what it seems. Which is true. You definitely get some Stepford Wives vibes from this show. And how did this show get made? It's based on the House of M Marvel Comics storyline that involves Wanda Maximoff, the Scarlet Witch, in which she has a mental breakdown due to the grief of losing Vision and uses her magic to alter reality. And full disclosure, fully researched the comic book aspect and also referred to friend of the show, BMAC, to get the great insight on the comics, since I myself am not a comic book connoisseur. So reading a lot of this was very helpful to understanding the show, because I think if you don't understand how the comic books laid this out, you could still understand this show, but it might be harder to piece together why it starts from the beginning to end in the order of the episodes. So, Daniel,
Yes.
your history, which obviously is a recent history with this show.
Right. Yeah. It was interesting. When I watched this show, I don't know if it was because it could possibly be because there's not only comics to know when you're discussing the show. There's actually like a long list of something like 20 something. I think it's like 23 movies that also feed into this. If you want to know the full story,
Very true.
that this is a direct kind of sequel series to, or a step within a greater series. And yeah, with that said, like obviously I had known the characters from that. And because it is a current series, I can speak to seeing billboards around town and whatnot. But the truth is that I've really I've been shown clips during the airing of this show by Just the Facts of the primetime community, who was interested because of its television take here in the series specifically. The way that it sort of adapts the mental breakdown is that it puts it in a television lens. And so obviously like a real great pitch for getting to watch WandaVision is getting to see the television shows that they're mimicking episode by episode. And so getting to kind of like experience secondhand like how cool that was for the viewership. I was basically shown something from the show every week up until a point where I realized I'm going to actually start, watching this show as it airs. And so from probably episode 4 or 5 on, I think I just sat down and watched it on my lunch breaks on Friday as it was airing, which is a little different for me on this show. But yeah. What about you, Tracy?
Similarly, I saw ads for this show, and I definitely was intrigued on what direction it was going to take. I liked seeing all the nods to shows of the 50s and 60s because as noted on a previous episode, The Shows That Shaped Us, I do love classic television. So seeing that, I was like, I really like this idea of taking kind of the skeleton of 50s and 60s shows and filling it with modern plot lines and context. So that's why I really liked the first like 3 episodes of this show like a lot. So that's kind of my history with the show. I watched it probably a little bit after it's aired. I think there was like up to 5 episodes, and I just kind of binged all of them in a row. And then I kind of waited and watched the rest of them week by week. But I kind of saved a few up once season or not season episode 7 aired, and then I was like, okay, this is wrapping up pretty soon, and I watched 8 and 9 back to back.
Oh.
So not a consistent viewing experience. I think that's kind of an interesting, evolvement when we get to these shows that are being released on a weekly basis, almost like network shows were, but they're on a streaming platform when you can decide when you want to watch
So,
it, and you can kind of decide your own pacing of how you either binge or to binge or not to binge the shows as they release. So that's kind of how I did it, is like I tried to kind of predict how quick they're going to move forward and which ones would kind of go together, which I think that goes into like the way I view this show is in 3 acts. So we have the first act that is very much the retro TV and the Westview world. And then we get into, you know, kind of people figuring out they're in that world and how to get out and how to, reach out to Wanda to, take this alternate reality out, because there is obviously a time limit to how long she can keep a lot of people trapped in an alternate reality where they're all being scripted lines. And then the third act is definitely Wanda versus Agatha and their fight.
mm.
as as all Marvel things end, with a large fight scene where a bunch of a town is destroyed. It just it can't be, it's the trademark stamp of like, are you sure this was a Marvel
Right.
show? Oh, don't you worry. We
That's,
got
that's
it.
pretty
We got
hilarious.
it coming.
That's a pretty hilarious way to put it. Also, pretty true. I really like and agree with the sort of 3 acts to the show, just based on where you are, and they do divide pretty evenly through about 3 episodes each. That's a good way to put it. That's a really good way to put it. Yeah.
So my favorite part is definitely the first act, where, episode 1, you're getting a lot of the Dick Van Dyke Show, which I think it's about in episode 8, where they show the scenes of her childhood and her watching television with her family, and they're actually watching the Dick Van Dyke Show, and you're like, so this is why it starts here, because she's going back, like similarly when you read a lot of interviews with people who created a lot of TV shows. And I think a lot to like an interview with Seth MacFarlane in the New Yorker. You listen to people who go like, I had so much comfort as a child watching these sitcoms, and I love sitcoms so much. And that's kind of what you see in Wanda, as she goes like, my best childhood memories was me sitting with my family, before they got bombed. Um, yeah,
Sorry, it's not.
it gets traumatic real quick, but it's like my best memories were watching these like heartwarming TV shows that wrapped up everything in a neat bow. And so when she begins creating her universe, the first episode, which is probably my favorite, is live from a studio, filmed in front of a studio audience, and Don't Touch the Dial. But the first one, they begin very similar to the Dick Van Dyke Show. She plays the wife that kind of makes all these like quirky jokes and comments about like, oh, I'm gonna make this like big full out breakfast. Let's look in the fridge. Oh, there's no food because we don't eat food. And that's funny because I kind of do like the take of them doing a whole show that's based on them being like these Marvel superheroes in a 50s or 60s style sitcom, because it's funny to watch them like him go to work and try to like just fit in and make small talk, and then her try to get along with Agatha in the same way. Like you watch shows like Bewitched, and Samantha has to, talk with the Kravitz neighbor and make them not think that anything fishy's going around. And that's like a easy parallel to show, because Bewitched is all about Samantha being a witch and hiding that from her neighbors. And so is Wanda. So that's the easiest parallel to an older show, but they actually don't nod to it a ton, except for in her doing a lot of the magic with, fixing, a pot or a plate that breaks right away. But then in a lot of classic TV shows, there's always the boss comes over for dinner and everything goes wrong in a zany way. And they do that. And then they also have, I forget the name of the actress, but the woman who plays Kitty on that 70s show plays, the wife of the boss that comes over, which I also thought was nice that they included some people who were on popular sitcoms of a decades show. That's just kind of like, to me, a little bit of like extra meta casting
Right. Yeah,
in
it's
there.
absolutely.
So that was fun. And then the second episode that I wanted to really highlight is the Don't Touch the Dial. And that's the one where they kind of move up a little bit. It's kind of more 60s, like she's wearing pants. And then they kind of go to this like women's club where they're sitting by the pool. And that's the first time that someone's able to reach into the universe with the radio. And someone kind of starts to go like, gotta get me out of here. And I liked how they did that a lot more subtly and slowly. I think my biggest note on this show is that since I really liked the first act so much, I wish there was more of it, and that this show kind of slow burned into deconstructing the alternate reality instead of it unraveling so quickly. But I understand that since they had 9 episodes and they had to have it end where it ended, that they did kind of have to neatly go, you get 3 episodes in Super Retro Land, and then you got to make it to current time period pretty quickly, because they kind of do 50s, 60s, 70s, and then 80s, and then 90s and early 2000s kind of like go in together. So, and that's okay because those shows are a lot more similar to what we air on now. So there wasn't a lot they can do. I mean, I think they did a pretty funny job of making it like the Office intro and almost similar to the theme song for when it was now the regular times and they did mockumentary style filming, and everyone kind of being a little bit facetious to the cameraman. So I think they did a good job of reaching each style. But my favorite parts were definitely 50s and 60s, and I would have watched a whole season where they just kind of made it to the 70s and in color. And
It's
then, the other shoe drops and Monica realizes that, she's in there and starts to talk to Wanda about things that happened in the other movies. So I think that is like one part of this show is it's really fun to watch, especially visually. They do a lot of attention to detail on all of the elements, but it's not an easy one to just drop in on, because there's a lot of portrayal of the comics and there's a lot of notes to other movies. And since Marvel has made so many movies, they were able to pull a lot of Easter eggs. So everyone who is like a huge Marvel fan is probably really pumped every time they see something. I'll say as myself, as like someone who like picks and choose. I'm a cafeteria Marvel person. So, I choose what I like and I get into those sub franchises, and I don't necessarily watch everything that's released. So there were things that I had to look into and be like, what are they talking about there? Why is this introduction significant? Because you could tell based on how they framed things, like, you should really pay attention to this. Or like even the final scene of the final episode. I'm like, so this woman is an alien. Hmm. Where is this from? Where is this going? Are we going in Guardian of the Galaxy direction? We going Thor direction? What's happening? Where is it going? And obviously not Thor. Those people were definitely more Norsey. But at the same time, there's just so many ways. that the show goes. So I think it is, before we get into it, because I will ask you, Daniel, about your favorite episodes and everything else. But it is good to note that this entire show is based off of the plot line. And we did talk about it slightly earlier, but they did adapt it slightly differently for the TV show. And in the actual comics, it's supposed to be more like she gets out of this situation with the help of Doctor Strange. I think some other male protagonist characters. And in this portrayal, she kind of realizes it as she goes through her kind of like, I mean, not to nod too much to our own segments, but Ghosts of Christmas Past with Agatha, who is like trying to figure out how Wanda got all this power. So she's kind of forcing her to go back through memory lane as she is holding her kids hostage. That you look at a lot of that, and that explains a lot of the comic book storyline of this Scarlet Witch character. And what's nice on the TV show, she kind of goes through all of that, and by doing that, she kind of figures out how to defeat Agatha, and she realizes it on her own and owns kind of all of the damage she did. Because once she's done, she's walking through the town and everyone's giving her dirty looks because she would turn them into kind of robots who only talked in niceties from sitcoms for a long period of time. But Monica forgives her and says, "Hey, I think a lot of people in your situation would have chose to, resurrect their loved ones at any cost. So it's not like they really understand the sacrifice you made to end all of that based off of a kind of freak accident of you having a breakdown and being a magical person."
Did you
So,
buy that?
you know, it's hard to watch this show and go like, life has a lot of twists and turns. So how are you going to take control of your magic? And especially in the Marvel verse, it's like only more trauma and terror will happen to you. So what's going to blow you off course next? Or what is going to keep you on the straight and narrow, basically? So I guess I'm not as positive in thinking like, what makes her not do this again? Because
Well,
she kind of won in the end. I mean, she did seem remorseful in that she learned her lesson, but she also became aware of how much power she had and, made some enemies with the government officials that were not being very respectful to the body of her deceased husband. So it's like, are they enemies now? Are they friends? You do kind of leave off going like, where does she live on that list? Because yeah, it does seem like in a way she went rogue and she's off the grid.
yeah.
So,
And she's always like, from what I remember in the movies, her character is one that's always like what actually makes her like from an audience perspective, from like my end, a lot of what makes her compelling is that it is sort of like she is one of the more tortured heroes in this franchise.
definitely.
And to the point where one of the movies inciting incidents is her powers unfortunately killing an office building full of civilians as like a
That's right.
mistake. And it leads all to this like legislation, and it's a breaking point for a fight of values between the team and whatnot. And like ultimately, as far as I can really remember, like up to this point, she's been in like 4 movies, the character, and the only time that her like actions and powers have actually done anything really positive, I suppose. It's
Yeah.
like she managed to kill like some faceless aliens, but a lot of the other time she's actually like on an intimate level really more nefarious in like what her actions
Yeah.
have been up to this point. So it's interesting in the way that they do kind of like play with that in the way where yes, she's broken down. Yes, as the mystery of this series unfolds, you don't really understand if she's doing it up until the end, if she knows that she's essentially kidnapped an entire town full of people and forced them into her television show, specifically based on, you know, her like love of television, her finding comfort in it in her hard tried times as a child. But to come out of that and really to like, yes, she's, I guess, defeated that. Like she's moved on from her immense grief of losing vision, and she's lived out the fantasy and shown herself that she can't have that life, and lost kids from it now too. But ultimately, like, she still hasn't done anything heroic in the sense that like we follow the other characters within this franchise for.
Yeah.
And she's even at this point trapped the villain in the town, still living out the TV fantasy without the rest of the show. To which the villain of this show calls her cruel, as kind of like a
Yeah.
final note from that character. So yeah, there is kind of a question of, is she, like, we've been shown over the past 20 years television characters that can be absolutely abhorrent while being sympathetic. And as of right now, from where I can kind of follow, that's where Wanda is. She's still, her actions are still selfish, and she's still kind of promoting selfish actions by the end of the show, which is why that Monica line actually kind of confused me. Because
Yeah.
what I took from the subtext of it was that obviously Monica is also going through grief and also loses a loved one when she's introduced into the series. But the shared camaraderie, as far as Monica reaching out and saying that like these people that you've essentially enslaved into your show over the past several weeks, that see your nightmares, that have been begging you to kind of like let them go on with their lives, that they don't understand your trauma, is interesting because it's like a heroic character, almost like reassuring the, this is what I got from it, and I'm just wondering, it's like it felt like a heroic character reassuring a less heroic character that the selfish actions were warranted in a way.
Yeah. And giving some validity to it, which is also leading us into, is Wanda a superhero or an anti hero? And I definitely lead a little bit more towards the anti hero because you really see her more as someone who has powers and not exactly control over them.
Oh yes.
Because she doesn't realize how much she has. She spins out and creates WandaVision and Westview. And you don't really like, she kind of ends pretty close to where she started, but even worse because she kind of knows what she could have had and it's all gone again. And, part of it is, you watch these shows that are all centered around the nuclear family, which is something that they talk about a lot when you study a lot of television writing. It's, and kind of a lot of old school politics as well, is like having this very cookie cutter, white picket fenced lifestyle. And you see her really thriving in that. And then as it moves on and the world starts to get closer to current events, she starts to unravel again. Because she even has moments where she talks to her kids and goes, I don't really have all the answers to what's going on right now. Don't trust that guy. He's not exactly your uncle.
Right, right.
And so you do watch it going, she is just figuring it out. And there's some humanistic empathy you can have towards her. Just, you look back on her flashbacks, and there's a lot that happens to her. She gets a bunch of power during government experiments. But at the same time, if you're looking at comparatively to the rest of the Marvel universe, you're right. You can't tally up as many saves that she's done versus destruction. So it's interesting when Agatha brings up this like Book of the Dead and prophecy about the Scarlet Witch, which reminds you a lot, if you've watched The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, of a similar take where there's a prophecy about Sabrina being kind of like the bringer of the apocalypse. And they have this kind of similar setup for her where they say the Scarlet Witch is going to be the person who destroys this universe. And she's like, that's not me. You don't know what you're talking about. But you do kind of look at that and go, so what character are you going to play? Like, are we going to see, I think one of the better perspectives we might get from this show is, are we seeing a hero turn into a villain?
Right.
Like, are we getting a series that's very much similar to like the controversial but Anakin to Darth Vader trajectory in the Star Wars
Oh,
franchise? You
interesting.
know,
The
like
same amount
seeing
of
someone
loss.
who's good but
More.
troubled and gets kind of talked into the dark path.
Right.
And then, maybe eventually turns light again. She really doesn't end up either way. Like, I think she ends neutral.
Sorry, the most
But
like charismatic part of Star Wars for me is the Emperor character played by Ian McDiarmid, and I'm imagining scenes of WandaVision with him. I'm sorry. No,
it
Catherine.
would be a great crossover.
Right. No, that's that. Yeah, that's an interesting point. That's an interesting point. I do kind of wonder. This is interesting because this is one of those things that. And one of the fun parts about a series like this, something that I do really like about these series is that we are kind of able to speculate, and
Yeah.
we're able to speculate one because obviously, even though the show is over, as far as we know, the story very much is not. There's a
No.
conclusion to the fake series of WandaVision, or the fake series of WandaVision, and the shows that they take inspiration from. But the stories of Wanda and Vision are not yet over. So we can speculate over where is Wanda in her journey, and where she's set to go on like moral standpoints, on narrative standpoints. Yeah. So there are kind of questions there, and there are other stories, I suppose, that they could adapt.
Yeah.
That might show answers to that, or might show possible leads there. It was interesting, like something about this series that I think kind of kept the conversation water coolery, much like other series of recent years, like Lost, Game of Thrones, Breaking Bad, et cetera, et cetera. Even in this one, Short Life, it is more or less like based on my understanding is based on what it was adapting, and where it was adapting from was sort of what would come about through like where the story would take the characters based on where they've been before in other mediums, and other characters that might be revealed, or coming up on their journeys, or that they might be kickstarting other journeys for, et cetera, et cetera. We ended up with a fairly narrow focus series from what I saw of those like fan theories, which I do sort of appreciate. I am kind of glad that all of these cameos that apparently people kind of like had little conspiracy boards about for weeks. I like that the series kept the agency in the main cast. And
Yeah.
so the climax of the series was really through like Wanda and Vision. And they got to kind of decide where their journeys were going next as characters.
Yeah. And what was your favorite episode? Since I talked about filmed live before studio audience and Don't Touch the Dial in my love of retro. What was your favorite?
Okay. Well, first, quick shout out. My favorite part of this episode is I got to bring it back to the limoncello float. This thing's pretty good. I'm not gonna lie. I'm enjoying this. My favorite episode was, and I wanna take back to something that you said in this episode, is that you could have gone for several more of those like 50s, 60s era sitcoms.
Easily.
I love that you say that, because I absolutely love the pitch of this as a TV show. A TV show that mimics other TV shows as it's like as a mystery's evolving through it is something that we needed back when we were talking in the Eli Stone primetime party time episode about like all of the high concept network shows that were coming out that they wanted to capture some magic with. This could have been or the like the overlying sort of celebration of TV as a greater high concept narrative happens slowly could have been the answer to that in my mind. But yeah, it's as far as the one that really stuck out to me was the all new Halloween Spooktacular,
That's cool.
which was one of the middle episodes. And I think it took a lot of inspiration from Malcolm in the Middle, which was a
Yes.
series I have very fond memories of because I never got to watch it as much as I wanted to as a kid. So I'm like very attached to a series that I haven't seen much of. It was on, it was there. I could have watched it. I don't know why I didn't. But also one of the like obviously strengths of WandaVision when they're mimicking TV shows, taking inspiration from TV shows, or things like the intro sequence. And we have a comment here from Just the Facts saying that they liked the Family Ties Growing Pain episode intros specifically.
Yeah.
The Malcolm in the Middle intro was fun. It was at a point where they were a family and the kids had aged up, and so it focused a lot on them. And it also had my favorite of one of my favorite parts of this show is that they would also mimic commercials of the time period.
Yes.
And this one had this wild, like claymation extreme sports like yogurt commercial that got really, really dark. And it was a trip. It was like it was probably my favorite scene of the entire show. I really loved how this like sort of captured what they were doing in the entire series as a scene. It was like a metaphor scene. And so this one had to be my favorite. Yeah, for sure.
So good. And I even just fact checked that now that this episode specifically is paying homage to Malcolm in the Middle,
Oh,
as
nice.
well as Halloween themed episodes. So very good eye.
This is kind of fun. We're also getting comments that in the original pitch of WandaVision, apparently one of the satire episodes was supposed to be like CSI. Like they were supposed to do different shows throughout the decade. Now the chat thinks that they made the right choice in keeping the family sitcom vibe, and it does keep it very concise. I love thinking about that though, about thinking about where else they could have gone with what other shows. And I guess my fan theory as I was watching the show was that at the end, the question was going to be what was the last show that they were going to do. I always kind of figured that it would end with like maybe a drama or something like that,
Yeah.
or possibly like adapting something in the end. They had caught up to the like where we are in sitcoms by the time they had gotten to the finale. I don't think that they ended up adapting anything in the finale.
No, the end felt very classic Marvel, and I almost wish they did something like if they did even like 60s or 70s Batman style where there's like bam,
Oh,
boom,
whoa,
and like,
that's crazy. That's
do the
interesting.
comic book motif. Like I would have liked to seen a little bit more art direction in the fight scenes to have that same nostalgic feel that we had in the beginning.
Right.
That's something, and that's something coming from someone who really loved the beginning and is less vested in how this wraps up plot wise. Because I'll be honest, like I watched it more to see how far they're going to go with spoofing the classic television shows. And I kind of was like, it's a nice treat to see something from the Marvel universe continue to spin its web, but I'm not so closely attached to these characters to be really devoted to where they go after this. I
I
was a
think
little
that's
more
fair.
detached and
Yeah.
able to watch it kind of in a less like I will do anything to see the next Marvel thing.
Right.
It was the hook for me was definitely the TV part. And I do think they do a really good job adapting it decade by decade. And yeah, you get to see it. And I think, it must be fun for Elizabeth Olsen to do the 80s kind of full house type episode and be like, I get to be in this cast this
Right.
time. And speaking of which,
Hmm.
Elizabeth Olsen should get a huge shout out for her performance throughout this. Because
Yeah.
she's able, like within Wanda, I know there's not a lot to really be said about the plot in this show, because it's a little bit more about just kind of adapting this comic, and it doesn't take a lot of twists and turns that you wouldn't expect. But in her acting, she's playing several characters at all times. She begins in a 50s housewife setting, and then like the next one she's also pregnant and playing a mom, and then it's 70s and she's going Brady Bunch style, and then she has to quickly kind of start getting more geared up to be her Marvel character. And I think while, you know, I have the opinion of the show being a slower burn, I think as an actress, she did pace herself really well, getting into her current age character, even if maybe the episodes themselves didn't pace themselves as well as she did.
Yeah,
That's
okay.
that's my take on it.
It's no small
And
feat. There are a lot of tonal changes a lot of the time with this show,
yeah,
especially in the beginning where it was more or less just like the series almost glitching out in ways where you could tell something wasn't wrong, and she had to sort of balance uh both being within the show and being Wanda. And yeah, that is really interesting. Wow. I hadn't thought of
and they
that.
have fun episodes that are actually called like breaking the fourth wall. And you do realize they made this show for people who love TV, because a lot of these titles are only things that really matter if you are really invested and dedicated to television. Because breaking the fourth wall is a big thing. It's like, oh my gosh, they're looking at the audience now. They're acknowledging that there's an audience here. And yeah, like, I don't know. It's interesting to see a show that's pointed at two target audiences, and that is television obsessed people and Marvel obsessed people, which
Right.
they're crossing over in this one. But, it's also, you're seeing them take some more creative risks in the beginning. I see less of those risks towards the end,
Yes.
especially, I will say as a Southern Californian, when you're watching the end, you're like, I'm definitely in Burbank at this point. And I did look in to where they were filming locations, and probably because of COVID restrictions as well, they did start filming at the end of 2019, stopped in March of 2020, and then resumed again in September up until I think November of 2020. So this
That's a
show
quick
wrapped up
turnaround.
and then got released to us pretty quickly. But that
Wow.
is why, if anyone has done, you know, go into Conan or different shows that film on the WB, you will kind of notice and go like, this looks somewhat familiar. If you go on the little golf cart and see the tour, and a lot of it was filmed on a Disney lot that they've kind of made a fake set. And if you've been on any of the studio tours, you'll always see kind of the fake downtown that has a gazebo and a lot of brick buildings and like a old school cinema, and that's what you're seeing there. And in the back you can even see like a water tower that says Westview, and you're like, this is the Warner Brothers water tower, or at least a nice nod to it.
Hmm.
So that's, I think it's interesting how much the show plays into television and the making of television, while it also being a Marvel show. There's a little bit of something for everyone in that sense, because those are the things I pick up being someone who really likes TV. But if I was someone who really loved Marvel more, would I be noticing those details? It's what kind of gives the show a lot of layers, even if I would say like the plot development episode to episode isn't as multifaceted as the production and design of
Right.
each episode, which is just kind of out of this world. It's very fun. Like the
Agreed.
amount of detail that is in each of the episodes making it to modern times is a lot.
This is true. Yeah, I completely agree with that. And for us who aren't, who are more interested in sort of like how, how can Marvel adapt TV, much like they've obviously had success in adapting their comics for the larger screen. Yeah, and it's I don't know. It's kind of funny too because it's like then you have the people who kind of know the Marvel stories and are able to sort of act as surrogates for like us as the television audience members, and
Yeah.
sort of like let us know that wherever it's going is somewhere that they found compelling or that have been proven to be compelling in the past in whatever mediums that they're sort of adapting from.
Yeah, the comics are definitely your compass throughout this
Right.
series because it takes a lot of twists and turns, and you're like in that car that's going, and the comic book will end at the same end point, but how they got there is a little bit different throughout this show, and I like that for that reason because you do read about what the comic was, and it does sound a bit more depressing than how the show played out because you do have the fun and the excitement of being like, which show are they portraying in this episode as they're leading up to the end? And that's really fun to see. And they do like the Halloween episode you mentioned, like the themes that you would see on sitcoms, and the kind of having of the children and different kind of the stresses of work. They cover all of those themes. Like they cover the lighthearted small picture issues while there's this like big picture issue of this alternate reality and how will it be deconstructed. Is it going to be from Wanda? Is it going to be from the government in the background? And I think you know my larger wish with this show is that it stayed black and white and went on like a Hitchcock vibe where it just like you would just see a flicker in one of the episodes, and specifically towards the end you would see like someone turned to color, and then the next episode would be all in color, and you'd be like, oh my gosh, what happened?
See, I'm a
Like,
sucker for when that stuff changes, though. Too, like
yeah,
I really enjoyed. I think it's like episode 4. Um, is like they actually put like there's a missing scene in the show, and they show you the missing scene, and how they do
yeah,
it is they sort of like they take away the grain and they take away and they move the aspect ratio and they bring you into the scene. And I'm always a sucker for when that happens. There's a really great movie by Javier Dolan, and it's called Mommy, and it's shot in portrait, and it only goes wide twice in the entire movie, and it's sort of through the protagonist's psyche that you sort of get those two moments of clarity where
mm,
where the aspect ratio is he actually physically stretches it out almost at one point. It's a beautiful movie, and it's just like this was not remnant. It's a similar technique, obviously,
yeah,
but through all of these examples, it's definitely a technique I'm personally a sucker for and enjoy. Uh, but yeah, I too would really love a show that had more time to sort of explore the idea of living in different TV shows. I love that,
yeah.
or
And the
inspired from different TV shows.
the Agatha all along definitely does like a montage that's similar to like the Munsters and the Addams family, and you're kind of getting into that hokey version of horror. But when you look at the people and how they treat her at the end, they feel like they were terrorized, and that's a part of me that is kind of like, I do kind of wish this was like a more of a horror show in the beginning, that they're in this
Oh,
alternate reality and took a little bit more of the perspective of the townspeople. And then you could kind of get those hints that Agatha is playing these parts throughout the series because you do notice it. Like she does show up always. And you are kind of like, okay, you're a main character. What role are you going to play?
right.
And then when they do her montage, you see all the little tricks she played throughout to get to the point in episode 8. But yeah, I think, wanting more of the show and it's slower and it being kind of in this like wish list of being in that kind of birds and rear window kind of way, I like, cause and also like Stepford Wives, because that was something where it's like everyone pretends to be cookie cutter, but there's something wrong. And that's something I got from the first few episodes that I was like, I like that this is not horror because it's not scary, but I kind of like that it's spooky. Like there's a little bit of mystery in there. And I just wanted that mystery to last longer. It's saying that the show is really fun to watch. And so you do love that that they're being inside of the television show. And they did one episode of the latest season of Sabrina on this too, where she's in the filming of Sabrina the Teenage Witch, the 90s 2000s show. And it's kind of a similar thing where there's something darker happening in the background, but in the meantime they're just doing a lot of like, oh, do this take again, and oh, your double's over there. And yeah, I think this show does an even better job of it being nostalgia television and them playing into these roles. And also, like, for Wanda, she's getting a lot of character development inside and outside of the sitcoms. So if you're looking at, I'd say the first episode is very much Dick Van Dyke. But on the Dick Van Dyke show, Mary Tyler Moore plays his wife. And then as a actress outside of this, she is much more the wife kind of like sidecar character in that show. And then she gets her own show, the Mary Tyler Moore Show, which is about her being a news kind of producer and working in a news radio show. And she is kind of living her life as a single professional during the 70s. So it's very progressive. And throughout the show, she's kind of like doing her own thing. And the whole theme song is about like, you'll make it after all. And the premise is like she dated someone for a long time and they never proposed to her. So she was like, screw it, I'm going to do my career life in Minneapolis. And then, it goes into a similar structure of a lot of shows of like workplace, but there's a lot of talk about kind of women's role in the workforce and outside of it in relationships and like being unmarried at certain ages. And they tackle all those issues in the 70s. So it's very progressive for its time. You would look back on some episodes and be like, why is it so weird that they have a divorced people's club? And, you have to know that you're watching a show from a different decade with different, ideas. But knowing those kind of shows and how that they were being mimicked on this show, and you're looking at Wanda's development and how she goes from being so stricken with grief that she's like, I'd rather live this 50s lifestyle where I really don't have to do much, and then get back to reality where not only does she have a lot of power as a witch, but she also has a lot more, control of her destiny, for better and for worse. We discussed it in the beginning. We don't know where she's going to go. I mean, the fact that she's in the main Marvel cast makes you think, I don't think they're going to make anyone turn into a villain. It hasn't happened yet unless she's going to be the one. But I would say if I was someone who followed the comics, I'd probably know the answer to that question. So that's why a lot of the speculation comes out as people who didn't follow the comics nor the movies extremely religiously, but do have a
Right.
devotion to television.
Yes. But at the same time, it should be valid for us to speculate on the WandaVision or on the character of Wanda Maximoff that
Yeah.
they create in the show alone, and the series and the cinematic universe. That character played by Elizabeth Olsen. Yes, we like just through who she is at this point and where we think she's going should also be something that's reasonable too. I suppose.
No, it's
like,
true because they play things out differently from the comics to the TV show. It is hard to predict how strict they'll stick to script.
Right.
And what they'll do for her within the Marvel universe, because it does feel like there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen in producing different mediums like television versus movies versus what for Marvel. And they have to make sure all of those threads are weaving in together. So there's a lot of cross collaboration to make sure everything goes as well. So you won't really know where something is going until the next thing comes out. And whether it's her doing a movie with Doctor Strange or getting another season of this show, which I don't know how they do unless, Agatha breaks out or pulls everyone back in. Hard to say. It doesn't feel like they'd return back to TV land.
But that's such a TV problem, is
Yeah.
how to recapture and yet not not just completely go back to, because you can't like recapture the magic of a first season. And the sophomore
No.
season always has to figure out how to keep the series framed in a way that is true to the series and also have a fresh take. That's not just us going back to a series in Westview and all these people being tortured again. And instead of Wanda being the one who's torturing them, it's Agatha or however they would do it. That's always the fun sort of when you have a finite first season, which are usually really strong first seasons. It's
Yeah.
always the problem the series runs into as it hits its sophomore season.
It's like, could we picture them doing a show where they take on the themes of must-see TV and like high concept TV, where she's like doing the like Sopranos theme and driving through New Jersey, or she's cooking up the blue and being like, "It's blue, bitch," and then taking on another enemy. Like, you do wonder, like, unless they find a way where they have to defeat more people in this like other universe that's based on all of the radio/television waves that Kat Dennings' character picks up. And they do set up some people where you're like, Randall Park's character gets like a big promotion at the end and you're like, so what's happening here? And they do set up that government guy as the bad guy. So that's also why you're like, so Wanda's not perfect. This guy definitely got marked as enemy. But you were also the enemy for the townspeople because they kind of treat you like a monster. So yeah,
Right.
that's what's interesting about a second season is like, would you take on kind of like a Twin Peaks vibe in the beginning and then move into, like Sopranos and then get into Breaking Bad or Sex in the City or like all of these other shows that get a lot of buzz in the same way the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s shows, they very much picked like, these are the hard hitters, make an episode that's clearly about them. It would be interesting to see, since all of the shows from current timelines are so distinct, not a lot of sitcom happening, and have really different settings, would she end up being like Lost? So there's so many ways they could take it, but at the same time, you would have to have that hook of like, what puts them back in this television universe, or why would they do it again? So it does seem like it'll be a standalone piece, but we'll really only know when they have those sweet updates that's like season 2 premiere or movie coming out this time with these characters coming back in there. And then you're like, okay, they're going to pick up on these storylines. It's interesting to see like Marvel do things almost in the style of like other anime shows that do movies and miniseries in between to connect plot lines and see some sub stories.
Yeah. Will we see Wanda and Vision in a primetime show? In a movie? Who knows? But this show, Primetime Party Time, could not have been made without the following amazing people. We're talking about our artwork by Fen at FenLatte on Instagram, our theme song by Jay Wright. Find him at jwrightmusic.com. Website thanks to Coco. Special thanks to BMAC for helping us out with this episode. We're back next week here at ptptshow.com with another Primetime Party Time. I think we're doing a new format. We're going to try something new while still being in the realm of TV, and we'll see how it goes, and we'll see you there. We hope to see you there. And I'm gonna finish this limoncello float as our song plays out.
Then float-tastic. A limoncello float feels like something that would someone would trap
you in a show and make you drink. I don't know. It works for me. It works.
I have received feedback in the past for making diet soda floats. Like, what are you doing to floats? Why did you do that? And titling it WandaVision and having it be about Wanda and Vision is like the smartest title.
Yeah, that's so good. Everything
It's
about
so good.
this is a show. This is a
About show.
straight up show for like metadata lovers. Like the
Yeah.
episode titles, the series title, the everything about it is.
I kept noticing
perfect.
that, and I was like, the show is meta, but then it's also this show is metadata.
Yeah, seriously.